Hello and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, wherever you may be in the world, and welcome to the latest in our series of Dux-Soup webinars. For those who are familiar with my voice, my name is Giles Garnett. I'm Head of Professional Services here at Dux-Soup, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce our guest speaker, Scott Wright, who you can hopefully see on the screen there, COO and co-founder of Amped Marketing, based in California. Before we get going, I'd like to remind you that this is a business-focused webinar, not a deep dive Dux-Soup technical session or LinkedIn technical session. Everyone's going to be on mute, but feel free to raise appropriate questions via the questions button on the GoTo platform. These are being monitored by Jin, as usual, our head of customer support. Where appropriate, questions will then be relayed to Scott at the end of the session, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for those at the end. Please keep your questions on topic. So if you've got Dux-Soup functionality related questions, please reach out to our support team via our website. Another reminder, this session is being recorded and will be sent to you in the coming hours. And later on, it'll be made available via our usual channels. On to our speaker. So some of you may be aware that Scott is no stranger to the Dux stage, and it's fair to say he's a bit of a self-confessed fan of Dux-Soup. Rumor has it he even has a branded Dux-Soup t-shirt. Over the last couple of years, he will happily tell you, there we go, he would happy to tell you that his life has gone a bit bonkers, a bit crazy, from being part of a business development team using old-fashioned cold calling tactics to drive sales. He's co-founded a successful business using LinkedIn automation at its heart, and has even found time to propose to his girlfriend. The passion and enthusiasm Scott shows for what he does is pretty infectious, as you're about to find out. And his insights into LinkedIn, combining automation and manual activities to close calls, is fascinating. Scott loves nothing more than building a rapport with someone, and this session is once again crammed full of practical tips to help you build relationships that lead to closing deals. Some great real-life examples. So without further ado, let me introduce Scott Wright.
Awesome. Thank you, Giles. Yeah, my two biggest things in life are Dux-Soup and proposing to my fiance. But no, pleasure to be back here and pleasure to be here today. This is my second webinar here at Dux-Soup, and in a little bit of a weird way, not weird way, but I should say that this webinar is a little bit of a part two, a little bit of a continuation of my first webinar that I gave about a year ago. So if you want to find that, you can find it on YouTube right now from the Dux-Soup site. And this one, I really wanted to focus on sort of giving you a couple of core concepts and some key takeaways on how to properly schedule a meeting using LinkedIn and Dux-Soup, how to pivot, how to continue a conversation, basically when you get a response from a Dux-Soup automated campaign. How do you respond? How do you carry the conversation? And how to sort of move this in a very unique and practical way. And hopefully you guys find this helpful. Jumping into it here. So as Giles mentioned, a quick stab at my background. I come from a cold calling background. I used to work at Yelp, making cold calls to, Bob's Donuts and whatnot. And really getting told to go away, if you will. I've been a Dux-Soup Turbo user for, that's actually incorrect. I believe that's like 5.5 years now. I forgot to change that. I've experienced all different types of LinkedIn restrictions, banned, I've been permanently banned, I've been all these different types of things. So I know the level of how much you can flex on LinkedIn and how much you cannot. I've managed business development teams all using Dux-Soup. I had a team of about 8 people where we didn't even make cold calls. All of us just used LinkedIn constantly. Sold to large enterprises selling to the C-suite, consulted multiple companies across many different industries, from companies providing cancer treatment to companies selling body cam editing software to sheriff's companies, to tech companies, security companies, and so on and so forth. Thanks to Dux-Soup and thanks to my understanding of how to approach people and combined, I have been able to co-found a company with my co-founder and founders and CEO, Sergio Campos of Amped Marketing. And I've managed well over 100 profiles across many different personas and verticals. And right now we have about about 70 to 80 active profiles that we manage, but 100 that we're sort of working with right now at this current time. Awesome. The agenda for today is pretty simple, straightforward. I'd like to do a quick little blueprint and recap my previous webinar, so it'll be very quick, and so you can see where we're at and how this sort of fits into the bigger scope of things. Then I'm going to cover what I call pivoting, which is how to have a conversation on LinkedIn and how to move it to the next stage. From there, I'm going to cover what is called avoiding scheduling hell. This is when you get somebody to say yes to meeting with you, but then you say, great, like let's schedule some time, and then they end up going dark on you. Next, I'll cover scalability tips using Dux-Soup, so how to scale properly using Dux-Soup, how to manage multiple different profiles and whatnot. And then lastly, I'll give you a slide or two on what we do here at Amped. Great. So to give a little bit of a recap and to show what I'm calling here, which is a blueprint, my previous campaign, my previous webinar was called The Art of the Approach and how I went from 0 to 350 meetings in just 3 months. But if you go back and visit that, what I really covered in there is these first 3 blue squares from left to right. And in there, I covered how to prep your approach and know the purpose of your campaign, know who your audience is, and how to read a profile properly, right? Being able to read their summary and different things like that. How to properly build a list, so some search filters and some tips and tricks there. How to create a campaign, a good campaign. How to know which is the best Dux-Soup feature for the job, right? So if you're doing event outreach, do you want to use enroll? Do you want to use first degree feature, and so on and so forth? Then once you've built that and understand how your approach is going to be, your goal is to get the acceptance. And so adjusting your connection message and rethinking your audience and making it more personal. Once you've gotten the acceptance, that's like the first part of the battle. The next part of it is to get a response. And so to get a response, you need to make sure that you've created a really decent campaign so that it entices a response, right? So those first 3 squares there in my previous webinar outline a lot of that. What today's webinar is going to be a little bit more on in depth is once you do get a response, for the most part, once you do get a response, how do you pivot that to get what you want and to achieve your call to action by still making it sound genuine and still making it personal? Then avoiding scheduling hell, as I call it, and then to be able to achieve your call to action is what I'll be focusing on today. But I'll probably put this into every webinar I'll do in the foreseeable future. This slide was taken from my previous webinar as well, but I want to emphasize this so much. Is LinkedIn is a social media platform, not a sales platform at the end of the day. So it's just like Twitter, it's just like Facebook, it's just like Instagram. It's all in that area, but Twitter's meant for news, Facebook's meant for not news, maybe news, but more for your family, if you will. And Instagram's meant for photos. LinkedIn is meant for your professional network. So when you think about that for a second, it's important, and I can't stress this enough, to think about what you are thinking about maybe when you're on LinkedIn. When you're on LinkedIn, what are you thinking about more times than not? You're probably thinking about, you're looking up an ex-colleague, granted, if you're not doing Dux-Soup outreach, but looking up an ex-colleague, maybe changing your job title and description, something like that, right? Well, that's also how your prospects are most likely using LinkedIn. Maybe they're sharing an article, something like that. And so being able to leverage that and come in and be genuine and be yourself, you're going to want to treat prospects like you would like to be treated. So if you don't like people coming at you maybe on Facebook trying to sell some maybe, I don't know, multi-level marketing or pyramid scheme or something like that, well, your prospects probably don't like that either. No one likes to be sold, but people like to network, right? So this is not an extension of your calls and emails. So what you do want to do, for instance, is do something like, hey, first name, looking to connect with others in the security space. Know any good communities? What you don't want to be doing is hey, first name, following up on my previous email, thought I'd try here. Let me know when you have 15 minutes for a demo. These are not the best ways to utilize the platform if you're making genuine connections with people in this sort of case. So again, can't stress this enough. LinkedIn is a social media platform, not a sales platform, and it's important to sort of have that mental shift there and be conversational when doing this. Cool. So pivoting. So one second here. Pivoting is what I call the technique of enticing a response and guiding a conversation to your desired outcome using engaging questions or topics, ideally in a conversational format. So what pivoting basically means is, if you've ever been to a networking event, if you will, right? Or, talk to somebody at a party maybe, right? When you're talking to them, it's always important for you to be more interested in the other person than, for them to be interested in you, right? So you end up asking questions about them, but you have maybe like a roadmap in your head that you'd like to do, right? So if you think of a conference and you meet somebody randomly, you start going back and forth, you say, hey, so what do you do? And the prospect says, oh, I do this, that, and this. And you're like, oh, that's fascinating. What are your thoughts on the conference? Where's it going? Like, are you enjoying yourself so far? Oh yeah, I think I really do. I'm doing all this. I really like this talk and that talk and so on and so forth. And you're starting to have like a natural conversation, but you're controlling it. And you're controlling it by pivoting and asking engaging questions and using topics to entice the response and keep it going. This will make more sense when I show you some examples here. This part, pivoting can be implemented in your Dux-Soup drip campaigns. So when you're writing out the campaign itself, right? Or in a reply to a prospect. I have an example where it's in the drip campaign in this, but in short, it is going to be mainly in replying today. Implementing the pivoting technique will make conversations flow more natural and genuine. It just feels more genuine in the sense where you're not trying to sell the other person, and it doesn't feel like it is. It comes off just so naturally when you ask for the call, when you ask for a meeting. It allows you to qualify further by using open-ended qualifying questions. I'll get into that here in just a second too. It creates a level of trust and builds rapport quickly. Well, because you're going back and forth with this person, you feel like you guys have already built a relationship, right? Since you can't really call the person, or like not too many people do cold calling anymore, and email has a really low response rate, creating a level of trust can happen on LinkedIn pretty quickly if done right, and pivoting is a great way to do that. Then if you do it correctly, it allows for an easier way to ask for what your call to action is. And all of this will make sense here in just a second if it doesn't currently. So pivoting has a general framework that I use, and it's relatively simple and straightforward. When you get a response from the prospect or from anybody, what you're gonna wanna do is acknowledge the response. So when you get a response from somebody who says, maybe you're selling Dux-Soup, for instance, right? And you're reaching out to the VP of marketing for somewhere. And you ask them, how important is social media, right? And they say, social media is crucial for sales and marketing teams to be utilizing, right? Then what you do is you pivot, and at first what you do is you acknowledge the response. So you say, sure, right, absolutely, totally agree, right? Then you add context to that response, right? To the prospect's reply. So you say, totally agree. Social media engagement is a crucial element for sales and marketing teams, right? Then you put in your pivot, which is sort of pivoting the conversation to the next sort of topic or question you're trying to get to, right? So you say, totally agree. Social media engagement is a crucial element for success in marketing teams. Out of curiosity, who do you think is leading the market for social engagement tools on LinkedIn? Now, I'm not saying you send these all in 3 different messages. This is the way to, that last one there is what I would be putting there. And what you do again is you acknowledge the response, totally agree, add context, social media engagement is crucial, and you pivot by saying, out of curiosity, who do you think is leading the market for social engagement tools on LinkedIn? Now that question at the bottom there is key for many different reasons. So out of all of the clients that I've been managing and the things that we've been seeing, what we've noticed is that a lot of times when you come in with really sales specific messaging and you try to get them on a demo immediately, it can work if you can send out 100 invites every single day, which we can't do anymore. We can only do 100 a week. So you have to be careful. And when you do establish a connection with somebody, that connection means that you can prospect to them later on if they say no to you right now. So again, it's important for you to have a back and forth conversation here, but you could get information out of them and sort of qualify them while you're pivoting. So what you do here is when you say, who do you think is leading the market for social engagement tools on LinkedIn? Well, likely this VP of marketing in our example here would respond with something like, oh, I think Marketo or I think HubSpot or whatever it is that they say, but more times than not, whatever it is that they're going to mention is what it is they're using, right? So if you think about that, it comes off more genuine. You've gained a little bit of intel, and they're likely to reply with what they're using. Now, this is one example of a question here that you can use for pivoting. You'll see other ones here and some examples that I'll bring up in just a minute. But just to think outside the box, if you're maybe selling medical device software or medical device technology, if you will, right? You could say something like, out of curiosity, and maybe that medical device manufacturer specializes in a diabetes tool, right? You could say something like, out of curiosity, who do you think, or who do you see most of your clients using when it comes to diabetes technology, right? And you're just having this casual sort of conversation, but whatever they reply with, they're gonna let you know. Or you could say, hey, seeing that your background is a network security architect, right? Does that mean that you have anything to do with like anti-phishing software if you sell anti-phishing software, right? Tell me a little bit more about your role. Or maybe they landed newly at a role, right? And they've been there for 90 days. Hey, congrats on the new role. Out of curiosity, like, what do you do to get yourself upstarted? Like, what types of technologies do you have to get yourself familiar with, right? More times than not, they're going to go ahead and reply with a few different things that could be sort of intel that you could use to carry throughout that conversation and qualify them a little bit more. Now, are you getting full BANT budget and timeline? No, but you're utilizing a way to have a foot in the door that leads to a casual conversation where you're also able to gain a little bit of intel, right? So let me give you a full example here. So in this case, this example, I meant to remove that question part. In this example here, this is going to be the Dux-Soup user in this case is a VP of marketing at an executive consulting firm. They do like sales trainings and they do marketing trainings and project management. The targets that they go after are sales leaders who have landed in roles in the last 90 days because they need to get a sales team up and running, right? Or maybe realigned or something like that, right? The prospect that you're going to see in here is a VP of global sales for an American multinational technology conglomerate corporation. This is a real conversation that we have had with a real person and one of our real clients. So first and foremost, this part in blue, this is automated, right? So this is a part of your drip campaign using Dux-Soup Turbo. And in this, it says, hey, first name, I took the reins as VP here and noticed that you also recently started at a new job. Congrats. A big part of my job is working closely with sales leaders like you. Looking forward to connecting, right? And again, if you want to know what's the best way to build a campaign and have really good follow-ups and connection messages, my previous webinar really covers that. Once they accept that connection, the first follow-up goes out. And this is going to take a similar framework of a pivot as well. So it says, thanks for the connection, first name. How has it been going for you, right? We're keeping the flow of this going so far, saying, how has it been going for you? Meaning my previous message was talking about how you just landed at a new job, right? Then it follows up by saying, I'm working on getting a better understanding of how sales leaders like you drive revenue in the first year or so in a new role. Can you share with me any quick thoughts on how you get your new team synced up and performing? Prospect response, campaign stops. Prospect response, for me, it's about a reset in this case. Simplifying the solutions and making it sales consumable so that they can articulate the value proposition. From there, I focus on attaching security solutions to other offerings in other areas of the business, broadening the perceived value we can bring, not to mention communication is key. Okay, so now that we got a response, it's time for us to manually respond using a pivot. So again, acknowledge the response, add context, agreed, communication is vital for success. Then pivot to where your call to action is. In this case, this prospect actually responded with quite a lot of information, which will happen if you use really engaging questions to the right audience. And so what we did is we pivoted right to go to the meeting, but with a soft ask. Agreed, communication is vital for success. You seem to understand how crucial it is for team training. And if you're open to it, I'd love for you to meet our team and briefly discuss this and other things like the most common types of challenges you see when training, right? So we're asking for a meeting and a discussion, but at the same time, the discussion is going to be around talking about these sort of topics, which are sort of discovery questions, right? To see if they have any issues that they pertain to that and they can leverage their services. Prospect response, I would be open to that. Great. So we have pivoted here and we got the person to say yes to meeting with you. So now you're getting ready to schedule the meeting, right? So what you're going to want to do though, is you're going to want to avoid what I call scheduling hell. Scheduling hell is basically once the prospect says yes, it's that pitfall you fall into when you say yes and you try to move it to the next stage and they go dark, right? And so why do they go dark and what is the reason? Well, go back to if you think about my first slide, how LinkedIn is a social media platform, not a sales platform. And you think about how people are using LinkedIn and when and where and how they're using it, this kind of starts to make a little bit of sense. Because if you think about it, when you're reaching out to a prospect, who knows where they're at? They could be at a conference, they could be in a meeting, they could be in line at Starbucks or at the grocery store or at their aunt's house or during a Thanksgiving dinner eating dry turkey with a bunch of family they don't really like or something, right? And so when you put that into perspective, if they're using their phone, you only have a little bit of attention span time to really grab that. And you want to make it as easy as possible for the prospect to take a meeting. So I found this out because as I started working with a lot of my clients, I saw that a lot of my clients, when they got assured yes or sounds good, they would immediately pivot to, or when I say pivot, I should say a change, if you will, change over to more email etiquette, which would be asking for times to meet, right? So sending out a block of times. Great. Do any of these times work for a quick 30-minute demo? July 4th at 2, July 4th at 6, 10, right? So on and so forth. When I saw this, I couldn't help but think to myself, I was just like, well, first off, that's a lot to type. That's a lot for you to look at your calendar, type this out, then send that over. Then you're waiting for the prospect to then reply to you. But then think about it. The prospect's going to look at this and then they have to open up their email and see what time works for them. It's kind of like, yeah, that takes a lot of effort to sort of do. That's like 5 different swipes on my thumb, right? Or maybe a couple different clicks on my computer. So you've already lost me. I put my phone back in my pocket and started collecting my Starbucks at that time. So we don't recommend doing this. Another way that I see, which can work, and I'm not totally against it, but we have a more preferred way, but using Calendly. So our idea here at Amped of using Calendly is, again, making it easy for the prospect who said yes to meeting with you to just meeting with you. Calendly's great, but at the same time, when you click on it, you have to fill stuff out. So they click on it and then it opens up a new page. They have to put in their first name, they have to put in their last name, they have to put in their email. And then if you have any additional questions, right, then they got to think about that kind of stuff, right? You reached out to them cold. And you're basically introducing a new barrier, another barrier, if you will, to scheduling this meeting. And you're introducing a new digital medium for them to go to. When in short, you can set all of this stuff on LinkedIn and never have to leave LinkedIn where they're actively talking to you. Why introduce a new thing? Why ask them, hey, what's your email? I'll go ahead and email you over some times and a Calendly link. It doesn't make any sense. You should just go ahead and ask for their email and book it blindly. What do I mean by this? Great. Can't wait for you to take a look at our solution in this case, right? What is your email? I'll go ahead and coordinate an invite for next week. Now, what you do in this process is when you say this and send it over to the client, and the data shows on our side that they are more likely going to send over their email right off the bat, since you've already had a rapport and going back and forth with them, then they just have to send over their email, which they know off the top of their head and can type out. They send that over. Then what do? Well, what you do is you go book that for a week out in advance or whatever. That is at your convenience, okay? You book it at your convenience and you send that invite out. Then you come back to the prospect after you sent that out and you say something like, fantastic. I took the liberty of sending you over an invite for next Tuesday at 7 a.m. or something like that. If that time doesn't work for you, feel free to let me know or propose a new time through the email, right? You're not introducing a new medium like Calendly that pops them off of the platform and goes somewhere else. You're not trying to write out a bunch of different times to get them to say yes to these different times or look at all this other stuff. You have them on the line, like a fish, if you will, on the line right there in front of you, talking on LinkedIn. Why would you want to go to a different platform and go that route, right? So let's go back to our example that we have here, right? So the prospect previously said, I would be open to that. Great. So what we would say then is, or basically, yeah, they said yes to a meeting. We just want to get the email and book the time. So we manually respond with, that's wonderful. What's your email? I'll go ahead and coordinate an invite for next week. Prospect replies directly with their email. This is what happens more times than not. Then you go book the time. You come back and you send something like this. Wonderful. I took the liberty of sending you over an invite for next Wednesday at 11. Let me know if that time doesn't work for you, or feel free to suggest another time through the invite, right? This is a way that we firmly do believe in. Calendly does work, yes, at times, but the success rate, you're gonna have a better success rate here because you're becoming more personal and genuine. And the Calendly at the same time, like, again, think about it. You ask them for the time and you're coldly connecting with them. So you want to make it as easy white glove service as possible. So this is what I call scheduling hell and how to avoid it. So hopefully this is a tactic, you guys can take away from this. So let's kind of recap all pivoting and scheduling hell once again, but let's look at one more other example here. And this is the real example from a real client. So, excuse me, need to grab some water. So in this case, the Dux-Soup user, Dux-Soup/Amped user, if you will, is the CEO of a cybersecurity hiring platform. His target is chief information security officers. Then the linked LinkedIn prospect is a chief information security at a large national bank. So here's the automation portion that has been built through Dux-Soup. This also follows a very default and normal way we write our copy for our clients, which is a connection message. I'm looking to get your feedback on my cybersecurity hiring tool that evaluates candidates on problem solving, not certifications or pedigree. Would love to connect and chat more. Then when they accept, thanks for the connection, we developed software that helps you hire the best candidates for cybersecurity roles. We use realistic simulations designed to effectively evaluate candidates and capture how they think through problems. We've also built a diverse community of pre-vetted cyber talent from a range of backgrounds that our partners can hire from. We're still in early beta and looking for feedback from potential users. Can I show it to you and get your thoughts? He doesn't respond. They don't respond. So the next follow-up goes out. I'm curious, when hiring, do you find your team spend a lot of time interviewing unqualified candidates? And the prospect responds to that part of the message, right? So the CISO, as we call it in the industry, Chief Information Security Officer, responds by saying, not really, I screen them first. I agree with your approach though. I tend to have a different perspective on candidates as I don't care about certs or years of experience, but rather can you think and solve problems? Then he hits enter. He has another thought and he wants to write that as well. I have a hack the box for testing competency, but that is too red team focused to be honest, right? So now the CEO of this cybersecurity hiring platform now is taking over the controls since this prospect has been ejected from the automation sequence of Dux-Soup, right? So what he does is he acknowledges the response, adds context, and pivots. So he acknowledges, yeah, HTB, and by the way, I might not know what all these analogies are, right? But just pulling it straight from here, HTB is great for red teaming. We're trying to bring that kind of interactive screening to other domains. It's also great to hear that you already think about screening in terms of problem-solving prowess. Hits enter, sends another message right after. If you're open to it, I'd love to show you what we've built and get your honest feedback, especially since your approach resonates so closely with what we're building. Do you have a few minutes in the next couple of weeks? That's the pivot right there, right? Prospect response, okay, I'd be open to checking it out, right? So we got the yes. Great, what's the best email to use? I'll send over an invite for next week. We're trying to avoid scheduling hell. We have them on the hook, right? Prospect responds with their email right off the bat. And then you book it blindly and you come back and say, fantastic, I sent you over an invite for next Tuesday. If that time doesn't work, let me know or feel free to propose a new time. So in this case, you could see pivoting sort of happening in a few different ways. You can see pivoting happening in follow-up 1 at the end. We're still in early beta and looking for potential users. Could I show you and get your thoughts, right? Open-ended question, sort of with a light ask. We've also built a diverse community. And then also using open-ended questions by saying, I'm curious, when hiring, do you find your team spend a lot of time interviewing unqualified candidates, right? So you're kind of using an open-ended question to entice a response to, move the question moving forward. And then you see it manually happen in green when it says, if you're open to it, I'd love to show you what we've built and get your honest feedback, especially since your approach resonates with what we're building. So that's classic sort of pivoting sort of approach. So moving on here, that's pivoting. That's sort of how I comment on avoiding scheduling hell. And in short, pivoting is just a way that you can utilize Dux-Soup to have genuine conversations that are going to sound more natural, back and forth, and it makes it so easy for you to ask for what your call to action is. So, and then with scheduling hell as well, that's a great way for you to go ahead and make sure that the meeting gets on the calendars. So on a different note, I wanted to leave with a few tips and tricks as it pertains to scaling your outreach with Dux-Soup as well. Now, these are some general tips overall, but I think they're really useful, especially for those on this webinar that are using multiple profiles. So managing outreach for others. If it's something that you're interested in, Dux-Soup has some documentation on their website that you can go ahead and find. But otherwise, yeah, you're gonna need to start thinking through how you're gonna set up your environment when you're managing these different profiles. So you're gonna wanna use multiple different Chrome profiles. So if you click on the top right-hand corner where your face is and you have like your personal and your work, and you're gonna wanna create new ones. And you're gonna wanna have emails associated with those because each Dux-Soup requires a Chrome, which requires an email, right? So you're gonna need either a dummy email or create some new ones, something like that, that will be reserved for those people. So Calendly, I do recommend Calendly in a different sort of case, which is when, let's say you're managing the profile of your boss or somebody else. Well, let's say the person says yes to meeting. Well, in some cases, what you can go ahead and do is the person who you're managing, have that person set up a Calendly and give the link to just you. And then when you're going back and forth and managing somebody's profile, when you get a prospect to say yes, and they say yes to a time and whatnot, you use that Calendly to book it based on if you were the prospect. So you would basically get that Calendly and you'd fill it out with the prospect's name and email, right? And then you'd go ahead and pick the time. And then it would be sent from the person you're managing to the prospect who they're having a conversation with. The other part is knowing if they're going to be on the call. So it's important to note if they're going to be on the call or not. So if you're managing a CEO's profile, right, getting to know up front if they're going to be able to make all the calls that you're going to schedule. I know from my experience, most of the time they won't, but we're still using it. And so it's kind of like, is it a bait and switch? Well, what you can do around that is you basically set the meeting. And when you set the meeting, you invite other team members onto the meeting, right? And then maybe a few minutes before the meeting, something like that, message the prospect from the person's account that you're managing. So in this case, I guess it would be a CEO. And just say, hey, Mr. Prospect, I'm running a little bit behind in coming back to the office or something like that. I'm going to try and make it, but I'll be a few minutes late. I may, but otherwise you're definitely in good hands, something like that, right? So then that way it tells the prospect like, hey, I did the courtesy of giving you a heads up that I may not be able to make it, which we know that they probably won't. But at the same time, you're able to still let them know that they're in good hands, right? And that's just in the case where they're not going to be able to make the call, right? There's other ways to do that as well. Feel free to get at me and we can talk about this a little bit further in depth. Then when it comes to messaging at scale, write each campaign sequence differently based on the persona. You probably know that, right? But really, really think this one through. And I think if you go watch my previous webinar, it'll make a little bit more sense. But you're going to really want to think about who you're acting as, right? So if you're acting as the CEO or a product person or this or that, and then who you're reaching out to and what does your tone and approach need to be? If you're a CEO, right, it's more shorter, it's more direct. It's probably more for like a thought leadership piece or something like that. If you're a salesperson, it's probably a lot more conversational. If it's marketing, it's probably a lot more curious, right? Then understand your prospect and understand the end user, understand like what is going to sort of stand out from them and write each campaign separately based on that. Additionally, once you get a couple of responses in on a campaign, pull the person aside that you're managing for, and you and them go through the responses that are there together and craft out responses together on the phone there. And do that once or twice so that you can start to understand how they speak and be able to mimic and match that as well. Then be aware of your entire overall Dux-Soup strategy. Dux-Soup is a beautiful tool, but at the same time can be extremely, what is the quote from Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility, right? So you have to be able to tread lightly and know what is going to be the best Dux-Soup tool for the job. And remember that Dux-Soup is a tool, it's not a service that's going to do everything for you. So if not used properly, you can really do harm to your account. So you need to really just manage that, right? And so I wanted to give a couple of tips on enrolling versus visiting Connect, which are two ways that you can sort of speak to people there. Enrolling is fantastic. It's very good to do a set and forget sort of status. And as of recently, you can now put the number of people, I believe, that you wanted to enroll, right? So I think you can say like 100 or whatnot, so it doesn't go crazy out of control. But regardless, enrolling people does require organization and awareness, right? So you're going to want to make sure that the messages are being sent out properly. And then you're going to want to be extremely sure that those messages that are getting enrolled to those people are not going to want to be changed down the road. If they are, if you do want to change them, it's going to be a whole hassle to go in there and clean it up, pull it out, and do all these other things, right? So really, really do your due diligence up front and really keep yourself organized, vet out your list. And I'll use an analogy here in construction. They say measure twice, cut once, right? Same sort of thing here. Make sure that everything's in a line before you move forward on that aspect. Now, visiting Connect is the oldest one that I think has been here. Visit and Connect is great. It's much more controllable because you could launch it and it's sort of working right there in front of you. And as you're going throughout your day, if you happen to detect the wrong company or the wrong this or wrong messaging, wrong space, whatever the heck it may be, right? Maybe you go over 300 characters in your connection message. You can just stop it right then and there, and no more, it won't go out any further. Other than that, you could pull the pending connections, which most likely haven't been accepted yet, if you catch it quick enough. And then you can sort of stop, see what damage, and you're going to minimize that damage, right? But if any damage happens, right? But it does require a lot more time and a lot more monitoring of it to ensure success, right? Because you're going to have to start it and stop it, start it and stop it, start it and stop it. While enrolling can just be very much enroll, and go talk to it later, right? So different tools for different jobs based on what it is you're looking for. But overall, I think the sum is make sure you're organized. Definitely use lists and use Sales Navigator list to keep yourself organized on which ones you've tacked on. And in your search functionality on Sales Navigator, you can include or exclude lead and account lists, which is a great way for you to keep yourself organized in Sales Navigator if you have that. There's an extra paid version of Sales Navigator called Teams. I think they call it Advanced now, if I'm not mistaken. This one basically allows for you to share lists and searches and exclude lists and searches from other people in your organization. So if you can get that as well, that would be amazing. And that's a great way to keep yourself organized, especially for blacklists, or make sure you're not touching on the toes of other people. So use lists as much as you can to keep yourself organized, basically. Awesome. So really rolling into Amped Marketing, I'll keep this short here. What do we do and what does Amped Marketing do overall? So Amped Marketing at scale manages the enterprise outreach through your employees network on LinkedIn by leveraging technology, consulting, services, collaboration, and coaching and training. So what we're able to do is we're able to manage your duck soup, if you will, right? And then really give you the tools to empower an enterprise organization to really start getting up off the ground running. So if you're a VP of marketing, or maybe you're in marketing and you have a few business development representatives and you're looking for a new tool, we could work with you on how to roll this out for you and manage it for your entire team in a very simplistic way. We make sure all of the hard work is done in terms of making sure the campaign's getting rolled properly, getting them sent out, managing all of that stuff. So you really just have to worry about messaging and responding to clients when they sort of come in. We also are able to give you a dashboard, and I'll show you a few more of our technologies that we also offer. But we're proud to stand behind the fact that we have a 36% engagement rate across all of our customers. We have roughly about 30 customers, and at this exact time, manage about 100 profiles, about 70 of which are active. So we do average a 36%, and this is from January 3rd, 2022 to June 13th, 2022. So the technology that we offer here is dashboard and reporting, and obviously KPIs and metrics. So I love Dux-Soup, but Dux-Soup is very individualized, right, and very designed for one person. With our dashboards, as you can see here, what we do is we're able to sort of combine your team all together, and your sales team, your marketing team, are all the Amped users, if you will, so that you can start having KPIs and metrics and making sure people are sort of just, that BDR is making sure he has to hit 60 calls a day. Well, now he's hitting 60 calls a day and making sure that at least 20 connection invites are sent out a day as well, right? So being able to offer KPIs and measurements of success and metrics, which we can help you with. The ability to A/B test messaging and campaigns. Then also, what our customers love, one of the most things, is our integration to Slack and Microsoft Teams for collaboration, which I'll touch on in here in a second. And we also have optional integrations to Zoom Info and CRMs like Salesforce, HubSpot, and Marketo. So for collaboration and services, what we offer is basically the ability to respond through Slack or through Teams Our Amped experts, including myself, will be able to help you craft the perfect response when a response comes in, master the Sales Navigator search filters and creating lists, help you strategize and consult for the perfect campaign. And then we also offer copywriting for initial campaigns as well. And over here on the right-hand side is an example of what it looks like using Slack. Obviously, it's blocked out to protect the client's information here. But this is how we're sort of set up, where the prospect's response from LinkedIn as it pertains to the Amped user will come into Slack, where our client is invited and we can start to collaborate on what a response looks like, as you can see down there below. And I can even give suggested responses right there in a quick and timely manner, right? Additionally, we have the ability for you to go ahead and reply on behalf of others also. And that being said, that's the end of my presentation. So hopefully you took away some stuff on how to pivot, how to avoid scheduling hell. Got a little bit of maybe some information on how to scale out your outreach on using Dux-Soup, and a little bit of a taste on what we do here at Amped. And for everybody who is on this call, if you have 2 or more users that you are looking to sort of use, or you have using LinkedIn or maybe Dux-Soup or something like that, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or email and mention this webinar that you saw it, and we'll provide a free 30-minute consultation for anything Dux-Soup, LinkedIn, or Amped related. And that being said, I will go ahead and hand it over to Giles and Jin.
Thank you, Scott. And a couple of really good pertinent points there. I think, thank you ever so much once again for your time as well, first of all. But the real life examples you share when it comes to pivoting are really, really good. And I see that a lot in the calls that I'm having with people as well, how that sort of evolves. And secondly, I really like your point on scheduling hell. You can spend so long trying to be courteous and respectful when it comes to scheduling a call, but by providing multiple options, we've lost sight of the fact that we're just making that conversation harder for them to say yes. So yeah, just getting that invite across can make it so much more simple for them, for your targets. So the Q&A, hopefully, I believe there's been some questions coming in. Do continue to get your questions in. I'm just going to hand over to Jin now. Hopefully we've got a few there ready for you, Scott.
Thank you again for the webinar. It was very informative, a lot of positive feedback. We have a lot of questions, so hopefully you will be happy to answer them.
I love questions, best part.
So the first question would be, can you give us an idea how your response rates for the connection requests are, and how the rate of prospects who make it into the meeting?
Oh, our show ratio. So if our clients are following all of our tricks and all of our tips on how to set this up properly, I actually haven't taken a look at what our exact show ratio is overall across all of our clients. I guess it's something I probably should take a look at, but it's because it hasn't really ever been brought up, nor has been really much an issue. In the cases where it has been, it's more oftentimes, for instance, we had a client not too long ago, and their technology was fantastic. It's just what was happening is once we got the email, we were passing the email over to them to schedule the meeting. But what they were doing is, rather than coming back on LinkedIn and scheduling it, they were emailing them with a different person, and this person wasn't expecting an email to try and set up a time, right? So it's just like in short, like if you're having the conversation on LinkedIn, keep it on LinkedIn and be able to bring it in there. Then the 36% engagement rate is across everything, right? So when somebody accepts and responds to the connection message, or when somebody accepts and responds to one of the follow-ups, and now, albeit, right, not all of those are positive responses, right? Sometimes it's a thumbs up emoji or a no thanks. But in those cases, which I didn't cover in this webinar, what we do is, just because they said no or no thank you doesn't mean that they won't say yes later on down the road. So approaching them later on down the road, maybe using a nurture drip sequence, but maybe just saying, okay, no worries, appreciate the connection. And then maybe a couple months down the road, when you have a webinar or an event that you're trying to promote, right? And using Dux-Soup, you could approach them in that sort of mannerism, and they'll still be likely to say yes and be able to show up in that case. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you very much. Another interesting question, in terms of booking blindly, do you tend to book any time of a day, or is there an hour or so that you tend to book?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So when I book it blindly, I do whatever works for me, but I take into consideration the prospect's time zone, right? So I'll look to where right, because you can see where the prospect's located, and then there's a location where their headquarters is, but you're looking at where they're located. And so if they're in the UK, right, then I'll try to find a time that works for me that's not super early or super late that will fit with them, and be able to book it there. And again, I just want to stress this because it goes against everything that I've been taught when I was doing cold calling, right? It's always like, give the prospect the ability to tell you what time they want to meet. It does seem a little weird at first, but it's totally not when you think about it. When you've gotten their email, they've said yes to meeting with you. So just go ahead and throw some time on their calendar, right? It doesn't hurt there. But yeah, so I would do it based on the prospect's time zone.
Thank you. And what's the meeting length on these invites? Is it 15 or 30 minutes?
Yeah, great question. So 30 minutes normally. I think, so this is just an opinion of mine, but in the Zoom world that we live in this day and age, I feel that if you put a 15-minute meeting, you can expect, like, the person had to almost go out of their way to put a 15-minute meeting on your calendar, right? You have to like adjust the settings or whatnot. I feel like a 15-minute is going to go 30. A 30 is going to, you should like be prepared to let it go maybe to 45 if they're interested, right? And 45 is basically saying it's going to be an hour. That's my opinion more times than not. But in short, 30 minutes I think is normally the best time for you to go ahead and do that. And if the conversation ends shorter, then it ends shorter. If it goes longer and they're interested, then it goes longer, and that's better for both of you. So 30 minutes is what I would do.
Nice, thank you very much. A different question. Is there an example of follow-up strategy when after the first follow-up, the person still doesn't respond? Are you asking them a completely different open-ended question, or are you resorting to, hey, just checking in?
Yeah, great question. So this is the best example of that here on the screen. So this was in an invite connection message. Then once that was sent, the person accepted. The first follow-up went out. They still didn't respond. And I think this one was set to like 2 or 3 days after the initial connection message. So they still didn't respond. And so you can see all I put in there is, I'm curious, when hiring, do you find your team spend a lot of time interviewing unqualified candidates? So my theory behind this, to whoever asked that question, that's a great question, by the way, is the invite connection message is meant to get past that gate and get the acceptance, right? Now that you've gotten the acceptance, you want them to respond. And once you've gotten the acceptance, I say go in with your first follow-up being a little lengthy, but asking for your call to action, right? So follow-up 1 asks for time. But if they don't respond to that, you're about to send them another message. This is going to be the 3rd message in your campaign that you're going to send to this person that has not responded at all. You don't want to look like spam. You want to just, at this point, honestly, just get them to respond to you. So to answer that question is an answer of using a question where I would, at this point, you just want to get the person to respond and go back and forth. So I would say use a unique question that is going to be pertains to them that they probably have never heard before. But keep that question in the realm of what it is you want to talk about. So in this case, when hiring, do you find your team spend a lot of time interviewing unqualified candidates? I don't get that question a lot on LinkedIn. Yeah, maybe I do. If you're selling ice cream, I don't know, right? I'm curious, when do you think that they'll ever make ice cream that will survive outside of the freezer but still stay cold? I don't know, I just made that up, right? But my point here is, like, you just want them to start talking, and so using a question to get them engaged, then my technique of pivoting that conversation a little bit further into getting to what you want should be able to get you where you're looking for. So if you don't get a response in the first follow-up, second follow-up, or third, get shorter and shorter, start using more open-ended questions. But I would also include a bow out message at some point, which basically says, hey, I appreciate the connection in addition to your network. If anything ever changes or you're open to discussing a little bit on this topic, I'd love to pick your brain. looking forward to us crossing paths in the future. Cheers, right? You should always have a bow out message at some point in your campaign. But yeah, hopefully that answered the question, Jen.
Thank you. Very useful. We had quite a few questions on the profiles. People asking, could you say more about the profiles? Are the dummy accounts all made with alias names or personas, or are they just copies of your account? And why do you need multiple Chrome accounts?
Yeah, great question. Why that's a big one. I can put a whole webinar on that one. But what I'll try to get at a high level is say, so when you're getting a dummy Gmail, you can use your phone and you yourself, me, Scott, I think I want to say maybe 15 different emails associated with like my phone number. Google starts to do some weird ways to authenticate with you. One way is like it really tries to get your phone number. Another way is using a recovery email, right? And even if you use a Google Voice number and your number, right, it starts to detect like, hey, all these are associated with Scott. And at some point, it's going to put a limit on you and say, hey, you cannot open up any more accounts, or they'll put you, I don't know, like a restriction. They'll just say, hey, you're using too many accounts, right? So you got to come up with something new. So you could use a friend, a family member, something like that. You could buy another phone. I think Twilio can help you with that. You could also buy Gmail addresses. So you could buy Gmail addresses from there's different sites that do so. It's just if you do buy those, you need to change the passwords immediately, right? So buy those, change the passwords, and then utilize those. Now, every Dux-Soup account, in our case of how we do it, requires a different email address for reporting and dashboard purposes, right? But if you're basically like, hey, it doesn't matter to me the metrics too much, or it doesn't matter to me dashboard and reporting and who's who and what's that, then I mean, I guess you could try and use one Dux-Soup account and just keep logging into other LinkedIn accounts, but that it's just going to get messy and overwhelming, and it's just so much easier to just have two separate Dux-Soup accounts associated with two different email addresses, because they each have different Dux-Soup user IDs, right, that you can keep track of and keep them separate. Then as for the Chrome accounts, so the Chrome accounts is just an easy way. So again, if you think how Chrome is built, there's like a little icon in the top right-hand corner. You click on that, you can actually log into your LinkedIn and download Dux-Soup and all of that kind of stuff and get all logged in without associating that Chrome browser to your dummy Gmail, right? The way that we operate, though, is we like to keep things secure and separate. So we have virtual instances dedicated to everyone that hosts that from that IP address of where that person lives for their Chrome account, and then we associate a dummy account, and then we have them log in as well, but we don't save their passwords or anything like that. Hopefully that answered your question a little bit further.
Thank you very much. Very in detail answer. We have another question. Person is asking, how do you make a distinction until what point the SDR has to go into the prospecting process before passing the lead to the AE?
Oh, fantastic question. So that question is actually going to be answered internally on your side, right? But if you're working with us here at Amped, we'll help you with that, right? So one of the things that we'll help you with is how to sort of work this internally from your side, and we'll give you coaching and consulting with your organization and help you sort of refine and define that process. Because what we've noticed is when to pass it off, when to put this into your CRM, when to do this, when to do that. It's all slightly different based on every organization, right? Every organization has a different concept of what an MQL or an SQL, marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, right? Everybody's got a different sort of interpretation, just slightly based on what that is. Some people, we've had a client that said, hey, every time we get an accepted, that's a marketing qualified lead. We've had others that said, no, I only want it when they've provided their email address, right? And that's going to be a sales qualified lead, right? So that's really defined, but in short, I think the general good rule of thumb is anytime an email address is given, and the email address was given based on the conversation, talking about you guys are going to have a discovery meeting and maybe get feedback on your product. By the way, I want to comment one thing on my previous webinar to today's. On my previous webinar, I talked about feedback, and with a lot of my clients, we get a lot of hit and miss with this, but it does get meetings. It's just it needs to doing it correctly when you have the meeting. So what I mean by that is sometimes when you're writing copy, if you actually just ask for feedback on your product, right? Then when the person comes in, the prospect comes in, they're coming in with a little bit more of a lower mindset, knowing that they're not going to get sold. But then you as the salesperson or whoever's running the demo, you're going to go ahead and walk them through the product anyways, and they're going to give feedback. Well, the difference between that and the difference between pitching, right? And you're pitching a product, the prospect's going to like your technology or they're not, right? To an extent. And you get to spend some time up front qualifying anyway. So what do you do? What's your role? So on and so forth. Oh, you do this? Okay. And if they like what they see, they're going to move forward, right? So it's just kind of treating a feedback meeting in a slightly different way. But at the same time, we all want pipeline, right? And so sometimes going with more sales-focused messaging would work well. But anyway, so that was hopefully answering your question and then adding a little bit more context as it pertains to setting up meetings and writing copy as associated with asking feedback.
Thank you very much. The last question which I have, one person was quite confused because you mentioned in the intro being blocked and restricted by LinkedIn, and they would want you to expand on this and what are the risks, solutions?
Sure. So like I said, I got to change my slide deck because it says 4 years, but I think it's been more like 5.5 years I've been using Dux-Soup. And when I first found out about it way back in the day, I was utilizing it and I didn't really know what the repercussions were. So I was hitting all these restrictions. Hey, you sent out too many invites. And this was back in the day when you could send 100 a day, right? But now, so I've seen those restrictions, right? And had my account hold. And then as I started getting more refined with Dux-Soup and the limitations, I did get permanently banned, or I should say permanently restricted, I should say. And this was a few years ago. And what happened was I was trying to map out my entire network, my entire first degree network. I think I'm at like 10,000 connections, something like that. And I could be at more, but I like to keep it this way. By the way, you can only have 30,000 connections on LinkedIn. But anyways, I was trying to map out my connections. So I was, with the way that LinkedIn Sales Navigator works, you can really only have, I think it's like 1,500 or about 1,000 people will pull up in a search, right? So even though it says 4,000 people are in the search, you can really only see about the first 1,000 or so. Well, what I was doing is I was visiting every one of those profiles, and I wanted to visit all of them, and I was doing it by geography or seniority. I can't quite remember. And I was going to kind of dice it up that way. And I visited all these profiles, but I visited them in bulk, and I had the bot going really fast. And that got me flagged by LinkedIn. Now, this wasn't my first warning and restriction. They had probably given me, I want to say 4 or 5 restrictions at this point. So they give you a restriction, slap on the hand. They give you another restriction. They give you another slap on the hand. They give you one more. They may have you check that little box and say you're not a robot and put in your initials and log you out and get you logged back in. And then the next time they catch you doing that, they may even ask you for your passport, which they asked me of mine, and asked me for an ID. And I actually had to talk to them, and they gave me one more chance. Then I tried mapping out my entire first degree connection, and they permanently restricted me and could detect that. They're like, hey, there's no way that you could be visiting 10,000 freaking people in the course of a day, right? So they permanently restricted me. Then right around the time where LinkedIn changed the rules for you can't do 100 per day, you can do 100 per week. Right around that time, I'd put in another appeal request. I could still, so in my restricted account, I could still use LinkedIn. I could still send out messages. People could still connect with me. And I unfortunately at this time wasn't able to test if I could connect with people using email. So I don't have an answer there, but I know for a fact I wasn't able to just like manually connect with people, right? It would just say failed, but I could still use LinkedIn in all the other ways, right? So I put out an appeal again because it had been, I don't know, 6 months. I put out an appeal again to LinkedIn to see what would happen. And to my surprise, they opened it back up. I don't have much other information other than that. You know, in my personal opinion, I would say that maybe it has to go with good behavior, right? They let me out on parole, if you will, or something, right? And I'm sure that they monitored my account for a really long time, and so then I didn't use Dux-Soup or really connect with other people for quite some time, right? And plus, I mean, I had so many other profiles to deal with, so I had that sort of going on with me as well at that time. But in short, one of the biggest things to think about, and this is for everybody on this call, is think about the delta rate of change, right? So if you're normally connecting with, before you start using Dux-Soup, if you're normally connecting with 30 people, you know, a week, great. You know, you could probably bump that up to 50 people for your first week in using Dux-Soup, then bump it up to 100 per week, right? If you use LinkedIn heavily and active and you've been using it before, then you're more likely going to be in LinkedIn's good graces to be able to operate there sincerely. But if they catch something where now you've been doing 100 per week, you visit 200 profiles a week, and all of a sudden next week you visit, you know, 2,000, well, that's a big rate of change, right? So they're going to catch that kind of thing. That's that first part, and then that pertains to everything, whether it comes to messages, visiting. Scanning, though, does not affect that. So scanning on Dux-Soup, you can scan without having to actually visit, and that's not detected by LinkedIn. And then I will say this, I've seen in the chat on the user group forum that people who don't have Sales Navigator tend to get busted more. I don't know if that's true or not, but it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because you're giving LinkedIn money. So they're more likely going to be able to utilize this, and they most likely know that more people that use Dux-Soup are likely going to have Sales Navigator, which increases their revenue. So from a business standpoint, it makes sense to maybe let a little bit of tolerancy in there, but that's my tinfoil conspiracy hat theory. I have nothing to prove that at this time, just what I've seen. But hopefully that answers those questions.
Scott, thank you very much indeed. I think yeah, we've run just over the hour, and yeah, we've had a great insight from yourself there. Just a quick promotion for in 2 weeks' time. We have a live Q&A session and a presentation from the founder of Dux-Soup, Will van der Sanden, who's going to enlighten us with the latest details of all the latest LinkedIn developments and a few things that are coming up on the development front from a Dux-Soup point of view. So do feel free to register via the website, and also if you've got questions, then ping them across to our support team that we can hopefully get them prepared for Will in advance. Send them through via the user group or via our Twitter feed, or indeed directly to the support team. And I just want to say once again from the Dux-Soup team, thank you so much, Scott, for your time, your energy, your enthusiasm, and yeah, really appreciate your insights and sharing that with everybody going forward. And it just leaves me to say thank you to Scott, and speak to everybody in a couple of weeks' time.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Dux-Soup, for having me, and look forward to talking with you. And again, connect with me on LinkedIn, and if you have any questions, I'm open to answering them. And have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Yeah, there were a few unanswered questions at the end there, so yeah, just reach out to Scott via his communication, or indeed via our support team, and we can forward them on. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.